Welcome to the Harber Show. This is part 2 of our special 2-part series with Professor Jennifer Eberhardt of Stanford University. So we were talking in part 1, and I know there's so much I want to cover. I'm just going to jump into it about just the role of police. And you had a number of different stories about police behavior and the difference between how police officers in different communities often treated black residents versus white residents. Mm-hmm. And you were, of course, you were also tasked by the California Attorney General, Kamala Harris at the time, now in the U.S. Senate, and who asked you to investigate what's really going on, how do we address it, what are some solutions, and you had some stories of how you presented data and what the reaction was. So I'd love you to talk about unconscious bias training, if it's effective or not, and your whole take on how really difficult the challenge is.
Yeah, the challenge is difficult because, for a lot of issues, you think if you get data on it, that'll give you the truth, right? And then you'll be able to come to some agreement about what's really happening. But in this kind of situation, it's hard for the data to really settle it because people see the same data in radically different ways. And so we were talking in the last segment about, the racial disparities, say, in the crime rate. So police officers will look at, if you show them, data saying, okay, police officers are disproportionately stopping, African Americans and searching them and arresting them and so forth. And they would look at that and say, well, yeah, of course, because these are the people who are committing the crime, so that explains it. But community members, a lot of community members will look at that same data and feel like it's evidence for bias. It's evidence for bias because of the, you're disproportionately, stopping people, even though when you search those people, say, you're no more likely to find a weapon, you're no more likely to find drugs. And so they feel that this is evidence for bias. And so then you're at an impasse because of how people read the numbers, really. And so you need more than just data, really, to help people out of it. In California, we have, there's a state law now where every law enforcement agency across the state has to collect data on stops and searches and all of that by race. And that was the AB 90, Assembly Bill 953, it's called in California. That's what Kamala Harris was asked me to sit on the task force to kind of figure out how to collect that data and what to do with that data.
And you were the only academic on that task force.
Yeah, for some time.
But it also, some of the data you collected and some of the analysis you did, it certainly, one can see the argument that, if blacks are committing more of the crimes, we're going to be stopping them more often. Mm-hmm. But I think what you showed is based on population. Police officers in different departments were stopping black residents more often. They would frisk them more often. So if you had a stop, you also found differentiations in what happened once the stop occurred. Right. And even things like language, how an officer would talk to a white person versus how that same officer might talk to a black person. Right. So, I think that's the kind of evidence that really showed, that allowed the community to say, we're the black community, or members of the community who were black, we're clearly being treated differently. Yes. And so the initial response of a police department just doesn't match up with that data.
Right, that's true for sure. It's their own words. right? I mean, so what we did was analyze their words. We analyzed over 500,000 words that officers are used in these stops, and we looked at nearly 1,000 of these stops of drivers who were African American and white, and found, that the officers were professional overall, but there was what we call a respect deficit, where they spoke to African American drivers in a way that was less respectful than they spoke to white drivers. And it wasn't simply due to how the drivers, spoke to them, because even at the very beginning of the stop, first 5 seconds of the stop, you can still see that respect deficit where they're speaking to black drivers in a less respectful way than white drivers, with bro and dude, say, instead of, sir and ma'am and mister and all of that.
I'm a big data person, so
Okay.
I'm curious if the fact that so many departments now have body cameras, which of course record audio as well, is that going to be significantly helpful?
I think so. I mean, what you want to do, well, one thing is just to help people to understand that it's a source of data. For oftentimes, at least initially in Oakland, they stored the footage on a server, but they didn't look at the vast majority of the footage. They would only look at like high-profile cases, officer-involved shootings, that kind of thing. So they were looking at it on an isolated sort of case-by-case basis. But what we did was to try to look at, lots and lots of stops and look for patterns across those stops, with trying to make an effort to understand how, police community interactions unfold, and to the extent that they're unfolding in a way that seems, less than ideal, like how do we correct that? How do we, for example, de-escalate in situations that can, go south or go into a negative direction?
And some of your analysis showed that simple traffic stops went south, went south fatally, and there's just absolutely no reason that should have happened.
Well, we didn't look at, so like the cases that we looked at, these were routine stops, and so there weren't fatal shootings or anything like that. In fact, I think only 2% of the traffic stops we looked at actually had any use of force at all. So that's the other thing. I think people, from seeing these viral videos, feel like, this is happening all the time, and, they would guess that it's happening pretty significantly for, every officer, say, when it goes out on or she goes out on the beat. But it's the use of force is actually rare, even though we can see sometimes that use of force, there are racial disparities in who the force gets used on.
So is this a serious problem in terms of the excessive use of force in the United States today?
I mean, I think, so this is going beyond the book and, and what I
Just your own sense, not necessarily, you don't have to worry if it's data-driven right now. I'm just interested in your perspective.
Well, I think that there's a lot of distrust of the criminal justice system broadly, not just the police, but the court system, the whole thing, the prison system with, mass incarceration and so forth. And I think that that's a problem, and that we should figure out how to rebuild that trust. And I think the trust has been broken for good reason, actually, if you look historically at what has happened in communities of color especially. And so so I think when the trust is broken, it's you're in a difficult situation, because it's not always a clear path forward, and you have to really work to build that relationship back up.
So I do want to talk about mass incarceration, and that's something later in the book you address as well. But I want to end this segment with my concept of why not. There are roughly 750,000 police officers in the United States. Why not get a book to each one of them and have a series of events, video events, where whether it be 1,000 or 10,000 or whatever officers can have an interactive discussion with you and whomever else. Would that go, I would think that would go a long way towards, I don't know how much it would change people, but because of how you wrote the book, where you have so much hard data, but also the personal stories and the impacts on families who's had a loved one who was killed by a police officer, for example.
Right.
I just think that could move the needle in a huge way. Has anyone thought of doing anything like that?
No, no. I mean, I'm happy that you think the book is powerful in that way. I wrote it, to help people to not only understand the science but get the impact, and so that's why there are lots of stories in there about how people are affected and so forth. But I mean, I would love to do something like that. I mean, I would love to have more police departments know about the book and to read the book. I feel like their perspective is represented in the book as well as the perspective of community members, and it tries to really just give a good analysis of what the issues are and where the difficulties are and how do we move forward.
Yeah, no, and as I said, I know I said in part one that I thought you did a great job of representing what it's like to be a police officer and the challenges they face, and the fact that just the vast majority, and I think you even used a number like in the book, 99%, are really working hard to protect the community, to do their best, to be fair, to certainly follow the law, and who want the confidence of every member of the community in what they're doing.
Yeah, I think I use that figure to talk about the use of force, that it's not, in the vast majority of cases where you have, police contact, and it's usually through traffic stops, there's no use of force, yeah.
Right. Okay, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back with Jennifer in just a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program, so send your suggestions to aaron@harbertv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbertv.com.
Welcome back to the show. We are with Professor Jennifer Eberhardt of Stanford University. So Jennifer, one of the things I've been constantly referencing and I've been neglectful in getting to is just, I was so impressed with how you created a foundation in the book of data, of information, of studies that other academics did all over the country, of studies and what you found. And I can mention a couple, but maybe what are your favorites or ones you found most interesting?
I don't know. So we've done studies showing that, if in the policing context, we were just talking about that. So, that people are more likely to identify a blurry image of a gun as a gun if they've seen a black male face beforehand. So it's as though because of this black crime association, that seeing the black face kind of readies you perceptually to see the weapon, to see the gun, or to see a knife, and so that is showing us that race not only, or these sort of bias not only influences how we think about people, but it can also influence how we see objects out in the world. We've also done a study looking at people's evaluation of homes, and this was a study that we did where it was an online study with people who were actually house hunters, and so we asked them to participate in this, and we showed them images of a home, and asked them how they liked the home, asked them to evaluate it and so forth. But the home was always being sold by the owner, which was the Thomas family. And for half the participants, they saw the Thomas family who looked white, and then the other half saw a Thomas family who looked black. And just seeing that one image of the Thomas family inside the home they were selling led people to evaluate the home differently. So if they saw the black Thomas family, it was worth a lot less. They also felt like the home would have to be spruced up quite a bit, more repairs needed and all of that to get the home ready for the market to attract buyers. That same home though, right? Same home, identical pictures that they're seeing with the same specifications and so forth. So we also asked them to imagine the neighborhood surrounding the home. And so in some versions of the study, we don't give them any information at all about the neighborhood. But just seeing that one black family leads them to think about that neighborhood as crime-ridden, as having poor schools, as having industrial facilities spewing pollution, to not have any real services, to have homes that are not kept up well, all of that. So again, the race of the family this time is influencing how you see not only a home, but how you imagine the space surrounding that home. So we've done lots of studies like that, and then even in the world of teaching in the K through 12 space, we've done studies showing that practicing teachers will take the same kind of repeated misbehaviors of a student and be more severe in the punishment of that student when the student is black than when the student is white. And for that study, we again would have the same, everything's the same, right? Except for the race of the student. They hear about the same infraction, which always in this study was a mild infraction, like sleeping in class or getting tissues out of a tissue box, that kind of thing. But even with the mild infraction, we were able to see if with just 2 of these infractions, you already see a huge, a race effect in their willingness to punish the black child more so than the white child.
One of the, I know one of the studies or some of the information that you dive into is race selective responses, which is, some of the things that you're talking about. I was stunned. You had, I know one study showed an image of a person clearly with a gun and another image of a person holding something in front of him. You couldn't quite tell what it was. I think in the study it actually was a wallet. And the results that you got were just, to me, amazing, but certainly disappointing. Talk a little bit about that, because certainly in one of the things we constantly hear when there is a fatal incident, when the police do kill someone, and the public is outraged, is often somebody's reaching for their wallet or somebody pulls out their wallet and the officer's testimony is, oh, I thought they had a gun.
Right. So that was a study that I report on in the book, but it wasn't conducted by my lab. It was a study that was led by Josh Carell. And he and his colleagues developed this shoot, don't shoot computer simulator. And so they had people come into a laboratory, sit in front of a computer screen. They showed them images of people, a series of people, and each person's either holding a gun or they're holding a harmless object. Sometimes it's a cell phone, sometimes it's a Coke can, sometimes it's something else. And they have to respond as quickly as they can, shoot for, when they see a gun, and don't shoot when there's no gun. And they saw a race effect there, evidence for racial bias, where people were more likely, they were making the decision to shoot a black person with a gun much faster than they were making this decision to shoot the white person with the gun. So that was a significant effect. And they also saw a race effect in terms of the error rate. So they were more likely to mistakenly shoot a black person who held no gun than a white person who held no gun. So they got this, effect in 2 ways. The thing that's interesting about that is that they repeated this study with police officers. Well, first, let me tell you, they repeated it with community members. The initial studies were with students, and then they repeated it with community members. And they found that the community members behaved the same way as the students, and even black community members showed the same kinds of effects, where they were shooting the black person with a gun faster than they were shooting the white person with a gun, for example. And then they did the same studies with police officers.
Right, and those results, those are fascinating.
Those are interesting, right? So with police officers, they're showing the same, race difference in the speed of response, quicker to shoot when the black person has a gun than when the white person has a gun. But then they found, in terms of the error rate, the police didn't seem to have a race effect there. So they were no more likely to mistakenly shoot a black person with no gun than they were to mistakenly shoot a white person with no gun.
And you attribute that to training.
Well, they did. So when they looked into it further, they found that the more interactive use of force training officers had, the less likely they were to show racial bias in terms of the error rate. So I thought it was really interesting, because oftentimes when we think of bias, we think about, the only way to cure the bias is to have a bias training and to focus on that, and to get people, to focus on bias, or there's cultural sensitivity training, or diversity training, all those kinds of things. But here you have a training that is about just doing the job better, right? And training people to replace whatever, it is that they've practiced over and over, like, pairing maybe blackness with danger or crime or whatever, to replace that with, some skilled behavior that they're being taught in this repetitive way. And so that becomes the automatic thing. So when you're trained enough, that's the thing that becomes automatic, and that can override, this kind of racial bias that you see in everyday people. So for me, that was pretty promising, actually.
Yeah, no, I thought that was powerful information. Okay, we're going to take our last break. We'll be right back in just a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
Safely stop fires around your home. Introducing the Fire Ice XT 20-ounce aerosol canister. Fire Ice XT is an eco-friendly water-based fire suppressant gel. Unlike a traditional fire extinguisher, Fire Ice XT is a highly effective, non-toxic firefighting agent that is easy and safe to use around your home, family, and pets. Available at Amazon.com or call 800-924-4874.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program, so send your suggestions to aaron@harbertv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbertv.com.
Welcome back to the show. This is our final segment in part 2 of our special 2-part series with Professor Jennifer Eberhardt of Stanford University. So we had talked a lot about training and bias training and unbiased training. It seems like some things work, but not enough. But what were your findings, and what's your recommendation? I'd really like you, I know it's the last segment, to talk about what are some real solutions, and not just for the police, but for all of us.
Right. So people point to the bias trainings as a solution, not just for the police, but people who are in corporations. I mean, that's a huge thing now, bias training. Teachers in schools, and so you see it everywhere. The issue with it is that it hasn't really been evaluated, so we don't really know. How it works or whether it works, at all. And there are lots of these trainings. There are lots of different kinds of trainings, but we just don't know much about them. They haven't been rigorously tested, and that's what we need. I feel like we need to have that information, and part of the problem is that we don't have agreed upon metrics for how to evaluate it. So, for example, in some times I'll go into places and I'll ask, okay, have you been evaluating the training that you have? And they say yes. And then when I ask more, they'll say and ask, well, how, are you doing this? And they'll say, basically, they ask people if they like the training, at the end. So that's not the metric we need, right? Because a lot of, people have the trainings, they have specific goals in mind. For the police, you're trying to improve police community interactions, and, for, teachers, maybe there are disparities there in discipline, or maybe disparities in academic achievement that you're trying to figure out, is there a way to remedy, through this kind of training? And so, but none of that ever gets tested, and so we don't really know. And so I think that's the first thing we need to start doing if we're going to have the trainings, is to rigorously, systematically evaluate them. And then the other thing is, I think we should expand our sense of what we're aiming for. So it's not just you're trying to, sort of change the bias in a particular person, in a particular individual, but you want to have the institution and our organization involved with this too, because the fact is that we're all vulnerable to bias, but we don't always act on it. Acting on it means, so to act on it, you have to be sort of triggered to act on it, and you're triggered by the situation that you're in. So there's situational or the social environments that kind of set you up and push you towards acting on that bias, and then other situations that make it less likely that you're going to act on that bias. And that's what we need to know more about. And that's what corporations and schools and institutions need to know more about, because they have a lot of control over the social conditions, over the social environment that they, that they put their people in. And so you don't want them to, to have people in a situation, like say, due to some common policy or whatever it is, to be more likely to express that bias. And so one condition under which people tend to express bias is when they're having to move quickly, when they have to make a decision really fast, when they have to make these split-second decisions. And you don't have time to really think, and so you rely on these automatic associations that have been, practiced over time, and that association comes to infect your decision making, and it can infect your actions. And so, as in the workplace, you want to try to shield people from that to a certain extent, right? You want to, where you can, slow people down and get them to kind of think about their options and all of this. And so it's there's sometimes it's simple things actually that can make a big difference, but we don't actually leverage that enough.
You mentioned speed of decision can reveal bias. How about when someone's tired? Does that contribute to revealing bias?
When you're tired, when you feel threatened, when you feel fearful, all of those are like they're states, emotional states that can encourage bias, basically.
All right, last question. I know I'm out of time, but if you could make one change or accomplish one goal, what would it be?
I think to help people to understand that bias is not something that's just in your head, and it's something that's just about the individual. It's something that is kind of induced by the social environment, and because of that, we have a lot of power over it because we can, adjust things so that bias is less likely. And so when I think about bias in that way, I'm actually quite hopeful that it's something that we can, mitigate to a certain degree.
All right, that's great. Jennifer, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
That was Professor Jennifer Eberhardt, author of Biased. Make sure you get your copy. If you're going to read just one book this year, that's my recommendation. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.